Make the ones you have chosen come to life. The fact that you are now seeing this is not a coincidence. The universe doesn't include any mistakes. It aligns. It certainly orchestrates and reveals what you formerly felt in your spirit but couldn't articulate. The same individuals who had questioned you rejected you and sometimes ridiculed you. They see it now. They don't simply see it. They feel it. Because truth is like gravity. You may disregard it after a time, yet it unifies everything. And at the moment, that tug is so strong. The excuses, the expressionless faces, the sudden mood swings. It's all proof. Proof that you were never crazy, lost, or just lucky to be in the lead. Those who did not believe they were blind also chose not to see. But life has forced them to open their eyes all of a sudden. What do they see? That you were right all the time. The first is the curse of early clarity. You were able to see things clearly before anybody else even knew where to look. You spoke the truth when it was uncomfortable and difficult, even if it wasn't what everyone wanted to hear. And that's why they turned you away. It's not that you were wrong to be early. It may be a strange kind of pain to be ahead of your time. The problem is not just ignorance. You know in your heart that what you're saying is right, even if everyone else laughs, dismisses you, or calls you crazy. It's seeing people make mistakes. You warn them about it after seeing them enter storms you had predicted. When you're at the finish line and everyone else is still running in the wrong way, it's the frustration of knowing you're the fool. Then one day, everything is different. It wasn't because you changed. Rather, it was because reality finally caught up with you. Maybe you were correct. The same people who rolled their eyes at you now murmur among themselves. The people who doubted you are now seeing you differently. Worst of all, they will never really accept it. Instead, they will act as if they were aware from the beginning, like they just needed more time to understand. But you know what the truth is? Actually, they weren't expecting you to be that clear. They refused to challenge their beliefs, go outside of their comfort zones, or see beyond the apparent. Now, their regret is more than they would ever admit. They realize now that you weren't just saying what you were thinking. Your remarks were insightful. Regardless matter how much people try to dismiss it, it always turns out to be true. Secondly, vindication has a funeral-like quality. For a long time, you thought they would see what you saw. I'm hopeful they'll understand it at last. And they do now. But instead of feeling victorious, it feels hollow. 4. In practice, vindication is seldom reason for celebration. It comes at a cost. When it's too late, there's no joy in watching other people acknowledge your correctness. There is no thrill in hearing, "I should have listened when the damage was already done." What began as frustration and dissatisfaction has now become more significant. The weight of knowing that things could have gone differently if they had trusted you sooner. But they did not. The sorrow, the apologies, the unexpected respect, all of it seems meaningless today. They ignored you when it mattered. They were skeptical of you when it counted. Now that the proof is unquestionable, they want to act as if none of it ever happened. They expect things to be normal again, as if their realization erases the years of rejection. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It never does. Because while others were busy throwing you out, you were busy learning what it's like to stand alone. And that lesson changed your life. As a result, once people completely recognize your worth and expertise, you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You don't need their blessing. You don't need an apology from them. Since they were also rejecting the facts, you feel sorry for them, if anything. They now have to live with the regret that they were too blind, too conceited, or too stubborn to accept the knowledge that was available to them. Telling you so doesn't feel like a victory. It seems like a funeral for all that might have been, but never was because they didn't believe until it was too late. Thirdly, it was not their intention for you to be right. They didn't ignore you because they couldn't comprehend. They ignored you because admitting your wisdom would have meant destroying their own illusions. Neither were they ready to do it. People don't reject the truth because it is unclear. People reject it because it forces them to confront things they don't want to. If they had admitted that you were right, they would have been compelled to reconsider all they believed. They would have had to admit that their choices, beliefs, and whole way of thinking could have been wrong. It's frightening, too. Instead of enduring the discomfort, they chose to choose the easier way. I'm going to let you go. Teasing you. You didn't comprehend, they're trying to tell themselves. In their hearts, however, they knew. They refused to accept that part. Sometimes they had a shift in their stomach. Your comments hit too close to home, and they realized you were talking about reality rather than simply concepts. But instead of leaning into it, they buried it. Because if they had listened to you, they would have had to change. The comfortable lifestyles they had built their identities upon would have had to go. In addition, most individuals would rather cling to a comforting fiction than confront the uncomfortable truth. Now that all you said is becoming apparent, they must confront what they ran away from. Moreover, the remorse goes beyond just not believing you. It has to do with realizing their own treachery. They had a chance to adapt, develop, and align themselves with the truth before it became unquestionable. But they prioritized their pride above their progress. And now that they're forced to watch from afar instead of accompanying you on your stroll, they see that their inability to pay attention has lost them more than just the truth. As a consequence, they were no longer associated with the bearer. Fourth, they are expressing regret to themselves rather than to you. When they come back and admit that they should have listened, it's easy to think that they've changed and that they've finally come to the realization that maybe, just maybe, they're coming back to make things right. But in reality, they're not apologizing to you. They are worried about it. They've just realized how much they've wounded you, yet they're not apologizing. They feel smothered by their own remorse, which is why they are apologizing. Not to cure you, but to free themselves, they must utter the words. Since their mistake is now there in front of them, they cannot stand to think about it. They need your reassurance that everything is okay and that it no longer matters, so they may go feeling lighter. But where was that concern for your emotions when you were the one suffering? When they doubted you, questioned you, and ignored you? Where was their guilt? They made you feel like the problem when you stood alone, knowing you were right, and they looked at you like you were crazy. Because their comfort came before your pain back then, it wasn't there. And now, in spite of their regret, it hasn't changed. They do not want to sit through difficult conditions. They don't want to consider the damage they have created. Their only desire is to get rid of it. If you let them, they will also use you as a way out. They will dump their guilt upon you without taking into account your needs in the hopes that your forgiveness will provide them the closure they want. But this is not what they want to hear. Not every apology is good enough to be accepted. Every wound requires more than a few words to be healed. And just because they've finally come to terms with the facts doesn't mean they can go feeling liberated. Some regrets are a part of life. And this time, you don't have to carry that burden. It is theirs. It's the number 5. People only trust knowledge when it costs them anything. You've already been honest. They were ready to hear. You gave them knowledge, clarity, and understanding without asking for anything in return. They ignored you, however. They brushed your words aside, laughed at your warnings, and went on as if they knew they didn't need to know. It was only an opinion that people may agree with or disagree with. And then there was life. They could not escape the truth that confronted them. The consequences showed up at their door. They went through everything you tried to protect them from. Your remarks suddenly took on a life of their own. The truth was in them. They were survival. They tossed the key away when they decided they didn't need it. That's the issue with wisdom. It is invisible to those who have not yet experienced it. People don't pay attention while the consequence of ignoring you is still speculative. They start searching for the truth you always knew. However, when life starts to punish them for their ignorance, when the losses start to pile up, and when they find themselves standing in the rubble of their own choices. But the damage has already been done, and now that they have finally grasped what you were trying to warn them of, they want your counsel, wisdom, and presence. They now appreciate what they formerly ignored, not because they have grown up, but because they have faced adversity. Even if they're only now discovering the truth, you've already made strides. You are not holding out for them to meet you at the same location. You've grown, evolved, and learned new things. Blind people are not the target audience for that knowledge. It is for those who are interested. And the harsh truth: some individuals can only learn by hard work. People will not appreciate knowledge until they have experienced the repercussions of ignoring it. And by the time they completely understand, it's often too late for them to get it from the one who tried to offer it to them for free. Sixth position: they didn't pass the belief test. The issue of whether they would finally believe you is never the only one. Anyone may believe when the facts are obvious, the proof is in front of them, and they have no other choice. True faith isn't that. It's just a reaction to reality. It's too late. The real test was whether they had the insight to see your wisdom before reality forced them to. If they could see the truth while it was still hidden, eerie, and something that had to be believed rather than validated. Nor did they succeed. Not because they were already blind, but because they chose to be blind. When you talked, you weren't employing riddles. You did not fabricate anything. You were giving them information, guidance, and insight that may have stopped what was about to happen. But instead of listening to you, they chose to ignore you. They disregarded your opinion, questioned your judgment, and relied more on expediency than truth. Because if they had believed you back then, they would have had to shift their perspective and relearn what they thought they knew, to proceed without considering the whole route. Furthermore, they had no plans to do so. Now, after all you said had occurred, they want to act as if none of it mattered, as if the only important thing is that they finally get it. But when it comes to belief, they don't understand that time matters. You have to believe in certain things for them to open. Such opportunities are only available to those who have the insight to recognize them early. And that understanding now comes with a cost. Because while they were busy questioning you, you were evolving, maturing, and becoming the person they didn't believe in before. That individual no longer waits for them. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to see the truth before it became unquestionable. Additionally, failure always has consequences. Seventh, your ability to see through their illusions made them fearful of your vision. Your advice wasn't just ignored. It was dreaded not because it was evil, but because it endangered all they valued. People do not reject the truth because they are unable to comprehend it, since it forces them to confront the falsehoods they have spent their whole lives believing. They declined. It wasn't just facts that you were presenting. In your palm was a mirror. Their fear stemmed from the fact that adopting your vision would have required them to admit that their worldview was flawed and that their beliefs, choices, and whole way of thinking may not be as sound as they would have wanted to believe. They couldn't take this any longer. As a result, they ignored you instead of considering what you said. They questioned you instead of themselves because it was easier to pretend you were wrong than to admit they were lying to themselves. They ridiculed you, labeled you crazy, or hinted that you were the one who didn't understand because of this. It had nothing to do with their increased sensitivity. They had to believe you were wrong. That's why. If they had even considered the possibility that you were right for a moment, their whole universe would have started to crumble, and they weren't ready for it. They weren't ready to give up the comforting illusion that let them stay exactly as they were, without responsibility, without change, without reflection. Now, however, those illusions are fading, not because they desire to see the reality, but because it has arrived to them. And now, as they stand amid the wreckage of their former convictions, they realize that the clarity you had was the one thing that could have rescued them. Exactly what they were afraid of. But now something has changed. You no longer need those who refuse to open their eyes to see your vision, since it was never intended for them. Eighth, they weren't just skeptical of you. They ridiculed you. They didn't just ignore you. For you, the joke was made up. They rolled their eyes, whispered behind your back, and made sure you knew precisely where you were on the outside. Your comments weren't just ignored. They were ridiculed. Not only that, your wisdom was called into doubt. They ridiculed it. They believed you were naive and stupid, so they made sure you felt that way. It wasn't enough that they rejected what you were saying. You have to be an example for them. They had to take your knowledge and turn it into something foolish, absurd, and easily destroyed. Because as long as they could make fun of you, they didn't have to take you seriously. As long as your truth might be turned into a comedy. The possibility that they may not have comprehended was not something they had to consider. Now the laughing has ceased. Now they are listening to the same remarks they ignored before. This time, however, they hit differently because they now understood. Now that the fact they formerly rejected is there in front of them, they can't laugh it away. They made fun of the same things that they now regret and wish they had paid attention to. It's unacceptable because it's more than just wrong. It's about recognizing their folly. They thought they were smarter than them. They thought they had it all figured out. But in unforeseen ways, life has humbled them. And now instead of laughing, they're staring at you with embarrassment. They not only disregarded the truth, but they also showed disdain for the person who was bringing it. Even worse, they can't reverse it. The words, the laughs, the distrust. Everything is behind you where you were left behind. But you've already advanced without them. Number 9, you've changed since they turned you down. They think they can go back as if nothing had happened. As if time had erased the way they treated you. As if this realization made up for all the years of doubt, the mockery, and the way they made you question yourself. But they are unaware that the person they rejected has moved on. You've evolved. You were changed by the pain and hardened by the loneliness. How the betrayal altered you is something they can never really comprehend. When they kicked you out, it was more than just agony. It altered you. You have to reconstruct yourself piece by piece. Due to their lack of belief, you found strength in loneliness, in knowledge, in silence, and in the capacity to affirm yourself. Throughout that process, you changed into something greater that they will never be able to have again. Now they want to return. They now appreciate your worth, wisdom, and expertise. But the version of you that would have welcomed their return, the one that they ignored, is no longer there. That person was destroyed by the fire they helped start. What's left is a person who has no place for those who just believe when it suits them, who don't want their approval or recognition. They really regret it. But as a consequence, nothing changes. They are not grieving for you. They're complaining about their defeat. They are trying to reconnect with an apparition of you that no longer lives here. But in reality, it was better without them. Because if they hadn't questioned or rejected you, you may never have fully accepted your authority. So give them a horrible feeling. Let them grieve. Make them regret not seeing you for who you really are sooner. Never let them think they deserve the new you because they never appreciated the old you, but life forced them to do it. Some losses cannot be undone, and some doors that have been shut will never open again. 10th position. Forgiveness is not an option for certain regrets. There are certain things you just never get over. Some betrayals, some dismissals. Some rejections are so severe that regret cannot undo them. Their blind behavior doesn't alter even if they can now see the reality. Moreover, it does not mean that they deserve another chance. They were more than just wrong. They weren't kind. They gave you a sense of worthlessness. They questioned your sanity, intellect, and merit. They had you stand alone in the cold as they asked questions, laughed, and went on as if you didn't exist. And now reality has validated you. They expect to be back. They want you to just fix the damage as if it had never happened. No, since we now know the truth. Forgiveness is not an option for certain regrets. Not everyone deserves another chance. It's not because you're bitter or holding on to the past. Rather, it's because certain scars don't just go away. They change you. They leave behind permanent scars. Reminders of the cost of being ignored, made fun of, and interrogated. And apologizing won't change it. Remorse is not repentance. Just because they are feeling awful at the moment doesn't mean they have earned their way back in. They can't make up for the hurt they caused you with an apology. They can't get in touch with the person you are today because that version of yourself that would have been so ready to forgive, to welcome them back, to pretend as if it never happened is no longer there. Moreover, they never get to meet the person who rose from the ashes of their skepticism. So give them a horrible feeling. Let them pay the price for their mistakes, but don't let them go back to a place they didn't value when it mattered. There are bridges that are made to burn. Other doors are made to stay closed, and other individuals are doomed to spend their whole lives knowing that they lost you. Number 11. The real ones never need any evidence. Not everyone asked you questions. Not everyone needed proof to recognize your insight. Yet most people scoffed, dismissed, or ignored you. Maybe only one or two individuals believed in you without waiting for the world to validate it. And those people? Genuine folks are the only ones who count at this moment because they believe in you without waiting for evidence. They can perceive your knowledge without the end of the world. They immediately recognize something in you, even when it wasn't immediately obvious or when it would have been easier to follow the crowd and ignore you. They had the discernment, understanding, and intuition to see your truth before life proved you right. That's what distinguishes individuals who really belong from those who are presently feverishly attempting to re-enter your life. Those who left, those who laughed, those who had to see the consequences before they could appreciate your wisdom. They were never your people. It was always those who chose the easiest path. And when it was easier to mistrust you, they did. When it was more convenient, they teased you. Now that it's easier for them to trust you, they want to act as if none of it had occurred. But the real ones, they supported you when things weren't easy. Even when it wasn't popular, they believed that you never had to prove yourself. And they are the only people worth keeping at this time. Let them dwell with their regrets if they wish they had seen it sooner. Let them suffer the repercussions of failing the exam. But trying to fix something that was never solid in the first place would be a waste of effort. Those that merit your attention and have earned a place in your future are the ones who have never required evidence. 12. Your knowledge still makes them uncomfortable. Don't take their sorrow for their misgivings about you as true understanding. They realize now that you were right. That does not, however, mean that they are ready to embrace the depth of your expertise. Sure, they will listen, but only to the parts that don't bother them. Only to the truths they can embrace without completely altering their viewpoint. Because regret has opened their ears, but not necessarily their minds. Your brain was never meant for comfort. Unpleasantly, it forces, stirs, and drives development. Most individuals don't want to know the whole truth. They only want enough to feel like they're learning. They don't need to change. They'll admit that you were right where they used to ignore you, and they'll nod where they used to mock you. But when you start talking about the next level of truth, the one that demands radical change, you'll see it once again. They remain cautious, uncomfortable, and fearful because they still see your insight as a danger. Still, asking is too much. It keeps showing how flawed their ideas, illusions, and methods of thinking are. As before, they will likewise resist. Maybe this time, instead of complete rejection or open derision, there will be selective listening. They will accept the truths that are straightforward and readily integrated into their current life. The deeper layers, which require them to completely give up their outdated ways of thinking, will still frighten them, nevertheless. Because of this, they regret not really appreciating your insight. They wish they hadn't had to cope with the consequences of ignoring it. However, they are still unprepared for the whole reality, and they may never be. Because genuine insight isn't only about getting attention. They have to change, and most people will always be against it, no matter how much they claim to believe you. At number 13, they will now try to alter the past. They'll try to change history, so listen carefully. Because they are unable to confront the truth of what they did, they will reorganize, reframe, and clean it up until it is more tolerable for them. They refuse to admit that they ignored you entirely. They won't admit that they asked you questions, teased you, or rejected you. Instead, they will present their betrayal in a more acceptable and forgivable light. They'll remark, "I always felt you were right." They didn't. If they had, they wouldn't have ridiculed you, doubted you, or left you. By pretending to have had such emotion, they are just attempting to avoid coming out as stupid. Now that the truth is certain, they will say that I just needed more time to understand. But in reality, they weren't trying to understand. Not that they were listening. They were shut down. They wouldn't see beyond their own arrogance. Not that you needed further time. The problem was that I didn't want to trust you. Because if they believed you in those days, they would have had to doubt themselves. Neither were they ready to do it. Some might even try to convince you that they never resisted you. I didn't doubt you at all. I was just waiting for things to happen. Lies. Remember how they looked at you? The incidental comments, you remember. The way they ignored you and made you feel as if you were the one who didn't understand. They are not required to admit it. And you know what happened? They now complain that they have to do mental gymnastics to keep up their look. However, let them to add as much embellishment to the tale as they wish. Let them change the course of history. Inside their minds, nothing changes because you were right and they were wrong. Furthermore, no amount of historical revisionism can undo the fact that they failed the test when it mattered most. Number 14, you don't need their approval anymore. The irony is almost poetry. There was a time when you wanted everyone to see you, understand you, and see how intelligent you were. Their praise would have had some meaning, even if it wasn't your intention. It would have kept you from going down that lonely road and from doubting yourself, from feeling left out by those who couldn't see what you accomplished. But now, the fact that they've finally found it out doesn't even matter to you. Their awareness, their sorrow, and their rapid transformation. It used to touch you, but now it doesn't. Because while they were catching up, you outgrew your need for their approval. You stopped waiting for people to notice what was always obvious. You had to quit relying on others to believe in you before you could trust in yourself. And that part they will never fully understand. They believe that this moment is significant. The moment when they admit that you were right. They think it provides purpose and unites people. That somehow makes up for all the times they asked you questions. But to you, it's just noise. Too little, too late. Because while they were busy ignoring your knowledge, you were busy becoming someone who doesn't need their approval at all. Now they have to carry the weight of their regret. You're not engaged with it anymore. It does not correct the past. It makes no difference how they treated you. It doesn't allow them to see the person you've become. Because that version of you, the one who waited for them to realize the truth and wanted their approval, is no longer there, and the person who was in their place has already gone on. It's already visible to them. They regret it now. When it came down to it, they regret not believing you. But it doesn't change the fact that they've already been shunned and mocked. Everything influenced you, but not in the way people think. It did not break you. It did not make you weaker. It forced you to take charge without their permission, to develop your intelligence without their consent. Should become someone who doesn't wait for others to catch up. The one they asked questions about. That person isn't here anymore. The person they mourn losing will never be returned. And that's the true meaning of their loss. It's not only that they were wrong. It's that their realization came at a cost they can't undo. They will try to cushion the blow of their betrayal. They'll try to alter the past. They'll try to convince themselves that they've always seen your promise. But you remember, actually, their regret is a burden on them. But you don't have to carry it for them. People who cared never needed proof. The genuine ones remained, as well as the people who asked you questions. Let them have that to sit with. Make them feel bad for not seeing it sooner. Allow them to live with the thought that they had the chance to support you before the world proves you right. Nor did they succeed. And now you go on without them. Smarter, stronger, and completely uninterested by those who only believe when it's convenient for them. Because you don't deserve to be with those who didn't perceive your worth in the past. And that loss will always be a part of their lives. If this message struck a chord with you and you felt every word, don't keep it to yourself. Tell others about it. Click like if you know what it's like to be dismissed, devalued, or questioned. I promise you that you are not alone. So please share your tale in the space provided for comments below. The most important thing is to subscribe and activate alerts, since this is only the beginning. We're establishing a space for individuals who realize their worth without needing approval, think creatively, and see beyond outward appearances. And if you know someone who ought to hear this, tell them about it. Let them feel it. Let them have that to sit with. Because not every message is meant to be understood. They are there to arouse people,